In any type of human development, the common thread there is that it's about conflict and its resolution. Aikido is translated as the way of harmony, but it's really not the way of harmony. It's the way of conflict, and the harmony is the byproduct of the conflict.
Exactly. That really lands with me.
Hello, everybody. Miles Kessler here. Welcome to the Integral Budo TV, and we have a wonderful discussion today, dialogue, exploration with a couple of fellow martial artists, a couple of fellow Buddhists, and a couple of fellow integralists for a wide-ranging discussion on Integral Budo. Today I am joined with Charles Crutchfield and Keith Martin Smith. There's one thing that martial artists, you get martial artists together, we love to practice, but then after practice, we love to just sit around and talk Budo. You get Dharma practitioners together, we love to practice, but then we also love to sit around and talk Dharma. And it's the same thing with the integralists. We love to put the integral theory into the world, but then we also love to sit around and talk integral. And it's rare when you get three people together that can have all three of those conversations at the same time. And that's what this conversation is on Integral Budo. Charles is an executive consultant. He's also a long-term martial arts practitioner. As a Zen practitioner in the Hollow Bones Rinzai Zen tradition, he is devoted to integral practice from the integral theory of Ken Wilber. In fact, Charles is the one who reached out to me to originally have these conversations. So thank you, Charles. Keith Martin Smith is an ordained Zen priest in the same tradition, the Hollow Bones Rinzai Zen order. He's a recognized Sifu and lineage holder in Northern Kung Fu style. He loves to integrate his Zen training, Qigong, internal martial arts into his other profession as a leadership coach, and he's the author of 5 books. A few of them are The Heart of Zen, Enlightenment, Emotional Maturity, and What It Really Takes for Spiritual Liberation. And his more recent book is When the Buddha Needs Therapy. And Keith, I would love to get you on the channel once just to talk about that. And without further ado, a discussion on Integral Budo.
Longtime martial arts practitioner since the late 70s, and have trained for the last a little over 30 years in a style called Dotoku Shinji Karate, a style brought together by my teacher, James Keenan. It is an incorporation of traditional Japanese forms in karate particularly, but also some of the other Japanese Budo, along with Chinese principles. And on the integral side, I have been a student of integral since the middle 90s, had the good fortune to get connected with Ken Wilber and have worked with the Integral Institute. And then finally, I've been practicing Zen formally with Jumpo Roshi, and that brought it out of just the martial arts arena into a pure Zen practice for me. I also work as a consultant in industry, doing culture change and leadership and bringing principles of Zen and Budo into those arenas, sometimes overtly, sometimes under the covers.
Nice. Keith, you wanna give it a shot?
So yeah, my training goes back to the early 90s, and I originally trained in Kung Fu under Shi Yanming, who's a Shaolin monk who defected from the Shaolin Temple when they were touring in '94, and I began training with him in '96, and then a couple years after that, I met this really sort of iconoclastic Korean guy in Philly where I was living, named Jong-hoon Jeon. And he was teaching Chinese Northern Kung Fu sort of through a Korean lens. 2 Chinese masters had defected under Mao and moved to Korea and opened a school and combined 2 styles, one Shaolin, one Northern Manus, and created a school there, and he trained under one of their senior masters. And he was a martial artist like I'd never met before. It was a fighting school. It was designed to teach you how to fight, how to breathe, how to punch, how to break stuff, how to get hit. We did full speed, full contact sparring. People broke bones. There were broken ribs. We had an open door policy where anybody in Philly could come into our school and challenge our school. We fought dozens and dozens of schools. It was really cool. It was the real deal. And his whole philosophy was that if you can't fight, you're not a martial artist. You can be an energy practitioner, you can be all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to throw a punch, you got to be able to throw a kick, you got to be able to be hit, you got to be able to move with power and grace and training and all this stuff. So it was super awesome. And so that's the lineage that I hold. So the bar that I hold is all my students have to be able to fight. We do a lot of energy work, a lot of Qigong, a lot of hard Qigong, a lot of soft Qigong. There's a lot of integration. And because I've been in Boulder, Colorado for 20 years, I've had to soften the Philly angle quite a bit over the years. Then I like Charles, I met Ken Wilber. I started reading him in the 90s and was able to meet him in the early 2000s. And I worked for Integral Institute out here in Boulder for a couple of years. And the integral theory really changed a lot of aspects of my life. It really was what got me into Buddhism when I was in my 20s, allowed me to see Buddhism as more of a science than a religion in a lot of ways, where you follow injunctions and gain insights and test those insights with a community. And I switched to Zen when I met the teacher that Charles talked about, Junpo Dennis Kelly Roshi. Met him in 2007 and was ordained under him. Wrote a couple of books about him and with him, and recently am now training under one of his Dharma heirs, a guy named Fujin Tom Pittner Roshi.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. So, how can I? It's always a trick to find the shortest way to describe what for all of us have been a very long path. But I actually think maybe at the beginning when I was I must have been like 3-4 years old, I had some type of like clarity experience. You could say it was a momentary state. Super young, and I had no cognitive development to even understand what it was. I was playing on my front porch in Dallas, Texas, actually Farmers Branch, Texas, little suburb, and it was the middle of the summer. The cicadas were out, and I had a little toy, a goofy toy, and suddenly I just had this kind of non-conceptual awakening or opening, let's say. And it lasted for, I don't know, a good 5 minutes or something like that. And there was just no way for me to understand it, no way for me even to describe it, no way for me to even relate to it, other than the fact that it stayed with me. The memory of it stayed with me as a child, as a young child. And I never even spoke to anybody about it. But what I ended up doing is, I was kind of a boy, like probably like you guys. I was always outside playing, doing something. I either had a stick in my hand or a ball or bicycles, jumping stuff and playing pickup football or baseball or whatever. And I would get back into that state in sports or in movement, in activity. And I also found that was happening in the martial arts when I would practice martial arts. And basically my whole childhood, my whole youth, I was either doing sports or martial arts. As I got older, kind of in my young adulthood, when I was 22, I started Aikido. I found Aikido. I'd already discovered it, but I knew that it was what I was looking for when I found it. The reason I mention all that is because I realized that what I was tasting in the martial arts was getting into this flow state always when I was like deeply engrossed in training and practicing with others. And it was really, I didn't understand it until much, much later, but trying to get back to that experience that I had as a kid.
Yeah.
And I got my black belt in Dallas, Texas, and promptly went to Japan to do Aikido. And in a famous, in kind of one of the founder of Aikido's dojo in a small country town called Iwama. And I ended up staying there for 8 years. And did the full kind of, that was my first integral move or non-integral move, that I kind of disowned my Texas identity, and I became Japanese, or as they say in Japan, I became more Japanese than the Japanese, and I just dove in. It was a hardcore dojo, traditional dojo. We were training full time. I say full time, about 15 hours a week we were training, and there was no internet. I didn't have a TV. I lived as uchideshi, as kind of a live-in student with my teacher for the first year. And after kind of climbing that ladder of martial arts in Japan and really kind of, I left Japan when I was 35. So I kind of was in my peak in terms of physical And I'd also kind of climbed the ranks of the dojo to one of the top senior students in the dojo. And but I realized that I wasn't really getting closer to what I was looking for.
Mm.
That I was getting better, faster, stronger. But I knew that the better, faster, stronger was dependent on the amount of training that I was doing. And if I would there at a certain point something flipped, and the training just I could back off my training a little bit, and the development kept happening. So there is that kind of critical mass that you reach. But I also realized that what I was really looking for, I was hitting the glass ceiling of the cultural context. So in integral speak, this is like thoroughly amber, Japanese, heavy, kind of blue, traditional, beautiful tradition, and I grew so much into if the tradition's a box, I grew into every kind of place you can grow into that box until I started hitting the glass ceiling, and I was looking for something else, and I wasn't seeing it in Japan, and I traveled around. I saw all the great teachers. Great teacher. My teacher was one of the famous teachers. My name is Morihiro Saito Sensei. It was a lineage holder from the founder of Aikido, and it was the founder's dojo, and it was really. I realized that what I was really looking for was I wasn't finding there.
Yeah.
It wasn't a judgment; it was just a recognition. Because I said, well, they're just doing something different. The founder of Aikido had this spiritual awakening for some reason. I mean, he was a pretty hardcore practitioner, but then nobody else was getting it. And great teachers, don't get me wrong, but most of them were doing some more. If there was anything spiritual, it was lip service or something that didn't quite feel like it was getting to the essence. And then after 8 years, I left. Before I always told myself I'll move back to the States, but instead of before getting back to the States, I wanted to do a little meditation practice. So I found my way to Burma and practiced with a man named Sadhu Pandita and Vipassana meditation. And within a day, I realized what an authentic spiritual practice was, because he kind of in no uncertain terms, he made it very clear. And I just found at that point, I found what I was looking for. And I ended up dedicating the next 8 years of my life to going to Burma and later Nepal to practice in that school every winter. So a cumulative of 3 years of silent meditation retreats with the teacher, daily interviews, and and to sustain myself, I would teach when I was off retreat. I would tour Europe and teach Aikido and earn some money to go back, and that ended up being Israel started to be in that trip, and I ended up kind of settling down here in Israel after 8 years of that, and knowing that it was time for me to integrate. This is going to be the end of my story here. It was time for me to integrate all the parts of me back into life in the marketplace, and it was a conscious decision to settle here, and yeah, so here we are, Integral Budo.
So for me, Integral Budo is the simplest way to say it, which is almost silly to say out loud, is it is integrally informed Budo. Obviously, that might feel obvious, but it's a little, it's I think needs to be said just because out there in the world, a lot of people look at integral business or integral medicine or integral whatever and think, well, it's beholden on the person doing it to teach people integral, because then they'll understand the levels and then they'll grow and then they'll all that stuff. And for me, that has always felt backwards. And the practitioner, yeah, I do consulting work and coaching, and it includes and has inculcated into it my integral understanding. But I rarely share that with my clients. I rarely talk to them about developmental levels and developmental lines and states and stages. I do talk about quadrants fairly often, but the important bit for me that makes it integral is that the practitioner is informed, is able to sit in an integral space, and then bring that into the teaching or the practice or the manifestation. And so for me, Integral Budo is Budo that could be extremely traditional or extremely non-traditional. It could be aimed at combat effectiveness, or it could be aimed at serenity. It could be about many different things. But whatever you're doing benefits from being integrally informed and understanding that, for instance, a student who is coming from amber or blue in terms of their developmental mode needs a different sort of teaching from a student that is coming from achiever, from orange, from pluralistic, from green. And if you're not aware of that as a teacher, and you try to teach from from an integral perspective, from a post-green perspective, from a viewpoint that includes all of the viewpoints, but you've got students who are looking for conformist amber, then you will not serve those students well. You will not be able to provide them with the education they need, and they're going to go find some other dojo, possibly one that's not integrally informed, but that is willing to give them the rules and the roles and let them bow and do all of those things in a way that suits their need for that structure. If I'm going to be an integral martial artist, I need to be able to work at whatever level there is called for by the context I'm working in.
Yeah. Basically meet them wherever their cosmic address is.
Exactly.
Nice. Keith, you wanna go?
Yeah, it's a little different for me. I mean, so in the Kung Fu that I teach, like the school that I run like the school in Philly was very much oriented around a much more fighting survival type of culture. There's no spirituality of any kind. And I didn't need it because it was like the martial arts school was about something completely different than my Vajrayana training. And that was completely different from the training I was doing on Ken Wilber, and they were like, I was doing the integrative work myself. I didn't, that was too heavy of a lift in the 90s to expect something in Philly to do that. So when I came to Boulder and first opened my school, the kind of what Charles is saying, but I did the adaptation a little different, where most of the students that were coming to me were sort of in more of a pluralistic sort of a frame. And I probably drove 100 of them out the door in the first 5 years that I taught, because I was doing a lousy job of meeting them, because I was running a combat school basically. And one guy stayed, and he's with me to this day. But then I learned that, like, there are all these ways to interpret the martial arts that I've done in a way that's much more sophisticated. So fighting, for instance, is really analogous to any kind of conflict with your wife, with your boss, with your kids. And I began teaching my students that, like, okay, we're going to suit up and I'm going to train you how to fight and I'm going to come at you. And I want you to stay in relationship with me. It's like, and if I'm going to watch your eyes, and if I see you go out of relationship with me, which is another way of saying if you get triggered, you let your amygdala take over, you go into fight or flight, I'm going to take you right off your fucking feet. Right? Boom, down. What happened? You went out of relationship. Well, how do you stay in relationship? Then you teach them how to breathe. You teach them how to open their peripheral vision. You teach them how to actually stay in their belly. You teach them how to find their one point and move around that. And all these ways that the ancient traditions designed as brilliant ways to work with the fight and flight response, which are applicable if you're on an actual battlefield to not actually get killed. In in the 21st century, that kind of training is kind of irrelevant, right? How many of us actually need to do life and death training? Very, very few of us. But when I adapted it over to relationship, and then it was much more applicable to my students, because if they can handle the intensity of fighting in a school, they can handle conflict with their spouse a little bit better, because they can match up with things like fight, flight, stay present, stay in relationship. So that was one of the ways that I tried to change the school to be more integral without ever having to use the I word. That's what.
Yeah, that's the key. You don't talk about Fight Club. If you're teaching Integral Budo, you don't talk about Integral Budo.
Where did everybody go?
The first rule of Integral Budo: don't call it Integral Budo. Exactly.
Yeah. And it allowed me to keep the like the fire of my lineage is, it is about, I go just, like I work out on a heavy bag all the time. Like, it's like, as I tell my students, you're not going to hit a target any harder than you can hit a man. So go ahead and hit the target. And like, there's no power there. You've been practicing martial arts for 10 years and you can't fucking punch, like it's a joke. I see so many schools that like, they don't know how to punch. They don't know how to kick, and that's not martial arts. It's something else. It's a beautiful dance. Right. But it's like, I hold the line of like, fight me. That's fight, and I think that's very Japanese in a lot of ways too, from the way I understand the Japanese market.
Well, in the second Matrix, when the Chinese guy fought Neo,
Yeah,
he said, "You don't know somebody until you fight them."
right.
And there's a truth to that. I mean, there's an
Of
intimacy
course.
to it that it can be brutal, but it's incredibly intimate as well.
Well, I'll share one story with my teacher. So I started training in the early 90s. I actually trained in the 80s in karate, and then switched to kung fu, and then was teaching under my teacher, who was just phenomenal martial artist. And he taught me up to a point, and then he was holding me for about 2 years. He wasn't teaching me anything new. And then I had a conflict in Philly where I was just late, and I was in Section 8 housing where I'd parked in the projects, and a guy came off a stoop and came up to my car, and I put wearing big combat boots, 30 years old, like peak of my training. I put my right foot back and my hand out, and I said, "Back the fuck off, man, back off." And he walked right up to me, and at the last moment, I realized that if I hit him, I was probably going to kill him, because I was completely like out of my mind, fight or flight response. I had no control. Instantly, I realized that I couldn't hit him, that I wouldn't hit him, and that I turned my back on him and fumbled and got in my car as he was like grabbing at my door and like pulled the door shut, and it's terrifying. And so I really thought that was like a real failure as a martial artist, that I turned my back on someone. And when I told my teacher that was when he started teaching me again.
Nice.
Because he didn't want to teach a barbarian the next level of training.
Perfect. So he noticed something developmental that clicked in for you there.
He noticed that I wasn't a knuckle dragger. Yeah.
All right. So for me, like, the integral is something that you guys are probably the same. I noodled around with it in Aikido, in the martial arts, for about 10 years, just kind of, and I was teaching a lot in those. I mean, I was mostly teaching because those years that I was a yogi, like that I dedicated to meditation, I was on the seminar circuit. So I was going from, city to city, country to country in Europe, and giving workshops and like weekend intensives. And I would just say, okay, this weekend we're going to do states. This weekend we're going to do shadow. Not everybody wants to do shadow in the martial arts. This weekend we're going to do stages. This weekend we're going to work masculine, feminine. This weekend we're going to, I would just take all these different models that I was coming into contact with integral and play with them. And in the end, for me, it kind of boils down to the 3 S's: to states, stages, and shadow. States training, which you're able to go from gross to subtle, to make those moves, not just make the moves in an embodied way from gross. I mean, obviously it's embodied, but to subtle to causal, causal to non-dual, and not just make those moves in an embodied way, but, and this could take years, but also apply your method, apply your skills from the gross realm to the subtle realm, subtle applications to the causal realm, more spontaneous applications, and apply them to the non-dual. Working on those applications can take years, and then bringing other people along in that is one form of working with Integral Budo. And there are schools that are explicitly doing that. Most schools, they have they located them somewhere in that spectrum, and they're just doing that, or they're teaching from gross to subtle, or maybe they're jumping to causal. But really being able to traverse through the stages and back, up and down, in and out is it takes a certain skill and experience. In terms of stages, I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about. I started my martial. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, in pretty orange context, postmodern as well. All my values were liberal, postmodern. I also grew up in a postmodern home. Not many rules. I was kind of free to do whatever. No hierarchies, and I loved sport. And I thrived in sports. I thrived in martial arts because they were taking me back to the piece that I didn't have growing up. Then I went to train martial arts in Japan. It was hardcore blue. I mean, going back, and I loved it. When I left Japan, my belly was full. I would go to Europe, and where it's very Europe is pretty green. And I would see other members, other teachers from my tradition, and just like dinosaurs, stuck, like so stuck in that tradition, so stuck in that style. And I'm thinking, all the work I would do with them was just it's kind of green, you know. It's like, let's loosen up, let's connect, let's flow, let's listen. What does it mean to be sensitive? You know, all of this stuff just to kind of break that pattern. And and I realized I didn't want to do the blue stuff anymore. I would kind of, my belly was full, and I wasn't interested in throwing dogmatic Budo on people. So we were doing more kind of, in a way, listening and connecting and relating as a way to, you know, have martial skill. And then when I started teaching in the West Bank to the Palestinians, I had a couple of big insights, because there was very little. The Aikido there was pretty rudimentary. A lot of ideas, not very good, more brute strength. And they were just all over the place. They were so disorganized. And I realized two things immediately hit me. Oh my God, they need blue. They need blue.
Yeah.
These guys need fucking hardcore blue. Number one. Number two, they loved it. They thrived. And number three, I could give it to them because it's what I was like deeply, that's my lineage, even though I didn't want to do it in Europe or with even here in Tel Aviv. These guys needed it, and it just felt like the right piece to give at the right time. And they thrived in it. They grew through it. Shadow. I find that most people in the martial arts, probably different in Boulder, but most men, I should say, that come to the martial arts are kind of following a power path. And in that power path, they're not so interested in some type of shadow work, at least certainly up to a certain age. Women are a little bit different. You know, they're more following an empowerment path, I find. But I don't do shadow work with everybody, because most people are not coming for that. But here's the thing about martial arts, and you guys will all know this. It is always there. The moment you step on the mat and the moment you get into, you know, confrontation, it all comes out. So it's like, you know, we're doing shadow work implicitly. And I basically bring awareness to that. I'm always reflecting it. I'm always kind of, we're not doing, you know, we're not opening up issues, because it's, you know, nobody's coming to the dojo to, you know, to cry their eyes out. What's needed? It always appears. And it's just like, if you look at the stages, the problem of one stage of development gets solved at the next stage of development.
Yeah.
So in a way, you could say whatever dysfunction is coming up in an Aikido class, or in a class, or in the community, or in one person's personal development, that becomes the pathway. And this is where we get into Buddhism in a way. That becomes the thing. It's like, okay, the Duke is here, so let's kind of open up and accept that, and let's listen to it and receive it until we understand it. Then we understand it, we can start undoing it and start working with it. So in a way, that's always happening. And it mostly happens, this is where stages, and shadow come together. It mostly happens in the context of conflict and conflict resolution. There's every move from gross to subtle in states is a moment of conflict and its resolution. Of course, to causal and to non-dual. Same thing, every move in the stages and developmental stages, it's a movement of conflict and its resolution. Every movement in shadow is a moment of conflict and its resolution. And as you guys know, you know, as good Buddhists, we know that when dukkha arises, the most counterintuitive thing to do is to stay with it. Same thing with conflict. When conflict arises, the most counterintuitive thing to do is to ground, center, open, allow, and connect. Are you fucking crazy? Connect with the conflict? No, we like you were saying, Keith, we go into fight, flight, freeze. So it's all there. That's where I think martial arts and any type of human development, the common thread there is that it's about conflict and its resolution. Aikido is translated as the way of harmony, but it's really not the way of harmony. It's the way of conflict, and harmony is the byproduct of a conflict.
Exactly. That really lands with me. And I mean, I personally haven't found the martial arts training a very good vehicle to work with my students. I found Zen a much more powerful vehicle, because there's too much noise in a dojo. There's too much going on. There's too much training, and I bring some of those elements that you're talking about certainly into it. But I mostly hold it like, this is a somatic discipline. If you want more, I can offer you more. But really, I'm going to teach states on the cushion. and where we can really help them to actually, well, how do you actually become still on the cushion so that you can experience the silence that's here? And if you can do it on the cushion, then I can teach you how to do it a little bit more when, say, you're doing your forms. Like how do you find the stillness while moving? And that's sort of, and then how do you find the stillness when you're in maybe more play conflict where we're sort of acting things out, and then up it up a little bit more. But but people, in my experience, have a pretty hard time being still on a cushion, much less in conflict with somebody else. And
Oh yeah,
so
it's important.
and so I found Buddhism is a great space, and Charles and I both trained in Rinzai, and so Rinzai is the sort of most samurai or masculine of the forms of Zen. And the beautiful thing is the container is very masculine in that you're not supposed to move. It's sort of rigid in a lot of ways, but there's so much tenderness, there's so much yin under that yang hood.
Mm.
And most of the retreats that I go to, half of the participants are women. And why? Because they want structure, because they want something to hold a container so that they can actually have the experience of themselves and have someone else hold that. And in that experience of that sort of healthy masculine container, a lot can be experienced and a lot can be transmitted. And I've just found that vehicle much easier to teach in than a martial arts container.
It's interesting to navigate this question in how much of this is in the space of relation versus how much of it is solo, how much of it is, and the cushion isn't always solo, and sadly, interactive practice is not always really interactive. And so helping people navigate that space, helping people get from a being taken into fight or flight, losing their seat, as the Zen expression is, and not being able to stay with the conflict or to stay with the other person. It gets right back to what you were saying, Keith, about when you're working with students and you can see them lose connection, and immediately you can put them on the mat. That loss of connection is something that I'm sure somewhere in our evolutionary history, there's a benefit that comes from that. But for us now in the modern world, we are so much more powerful when we are able to be connected, when we are able to step in, when we are able to stand in the fire and not look away. And to be able to get there, whether it is through sitting practice or is through two-handed game as we play in the martial arts that I came up in, or whatever it might be, to be able to be intimately connected, no stepping back, no flinching. I am right here with you until this is resolved, gives us so much more power to surf the energy of that conflict and bring it to a resolution, and a resolution that ideally is for all of the parties in the conflict, not the subject object model of I'm going to make my fire come out on top of yours, but instead we are going to come to a resolution together.
Right. I mean, not only
Be
does it
able
give us more power, it doesn't just give us more power, it's a prerequisite for coming to a resolution together. Anything else
100%.
is going to be perpetuation of conflict. I mean, like the key thing, this what the kind of unique thing about Aikido. The exceptional thing about Aikido as an art, there are other people that are discovering this in all the arts. I believe, like when you reach mastery, it's all there. But in Aikido, it's explicit, is that it's not a zero sum martial art. A lot of people are training in a zero sum way because that's just where they're at. But the whole purpose, philosophy, and application of the art is towards positive sum. That's why there's no competition in Aikido. That's why there's no explicit fighting. So you can go full on hardcore in your training, which I did for years in Japan, but it's always within the forms, and we're changing roles. We're kind of inhabiting each other's roles back and forth, but it's explicitly for the purpose of positive sum. The only way to come to positive sum, and I'm sure you guys get this, but just to kind of briefly, zero sum, one wins, the other loses. 100% satisfaction on one side at the expense of the other person. The best you can do, the very best you can do in a zero sum is agree to disagree. It's not 100% satisfying, but at least it's better than, whatever. But it's that move to the middle where you lose the extreme, you lose the poles. So you're kind of hanging out there, but you don't have the energy and the power of the poles. A positive sum resolution is when you when you're authentically in your own center, awake, centered, grounded, and connected with the other. Those are the kind of the prerequisites. And in those, you fully enter into the conflict, but for the intention of its resolution. And how do you do that resolution? It's a complete, you really got to drop into, has to be a lot of mushin. There has to be a lot of kimusubi, deeply connecting with your partner. There has to be a certain amount of muscle memory skill in terms of the martial application of it. And then it's grace, then you let go and just trust that the process is going to lead you into the resolution. Whereas every single fiber of our being wants to do the opposite. Anything 100%. That Miles does, anything the ego does, any agency that I apply in there, even at the very end, it creates separation and it's zero sum. So that's the intention of Aikido. And I know a lot of other, every master in any martial art actually kind of punches through and reaches that level. But that's why I say that the inner work, the inner training is the prerequisite. At a certain point, if somebody wants to go full on external physical, God bless them, go for it. I did for years. But at a certain point, if that orientation changes, then it's a whole new ballgame.
100%. Like, and the thing with my teacher was that even though it seems so sort of aggressive, sounds almost like a Krav Maga school or a Muay Thai school or something, but it wasn't at all. When he fought, he was just, hands were just, his wrist, one wrist was like this and the other one was over, and he's just completely calm. Mm-hmm. And so you would fight him for 10 minutes, full speed, full contact with full gear. He would never open his mouth. And he wasn't the one that hurt any of us. We would all hurt each other. That's
I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah, if anybody got hurt, they hurt themselves on
like, but it was all chi. Was it like it was ringing the bell? And he would fight 4 of us 10-minute rounds each with a minute break in between. He'd fight for 40 minutes in his 50s, and take his helmet off. He's breathing through his mouth, and so he was very much holding what you were saying. He wasn't teaching it, I would say. It was embodied. And for those of us that were paying attention, you could just see he was doing things differently than in any other school except what might have been an Aikido school, but.
Well, would you say he was doing things differently, or he was doing different things from a different place? He was inhabiting a different perspective.
He was inhabiting a different perspective, and his somatic mastery was so off the track. He was really, I think he was, in hindsight, I think he was a savant. So he was, his mastery of chi was just incredible. We used to drive cars over him. You could put the back of his head on a chair and his heels on another chair, hold his whole body weight up, and then we break concrete across his belly, and he wouldn't dip. And he was not a big guy at all. Like he didn't go to the gym. Like this wasn't gross musculature or him doing, crunches, after class, anything like that. He embodied a kind of mastery that I've never really seen. And I honestly don't think that he actually really cognitively fully understood it. I think he just had it because he really couldn't teach it. You had to just watch him and go, why is he so different than everybody else?
Yeah, I was going to say that if you think of the qualities of a flow state, they're radically timeless, radically spaceless, radically effortless, and radically selfless. So that when I say it sounds like he was doing his martial arts from a different place.
I think so, yeah. And I'd ask him he was Korean, his English was pretty broken, but I'd ask him an elaborate question like, Master, when you do this, and am I pulling up? Am I engaging? Pulling in the 1 point and this and that. And he'd listen to the whole question and go, no. And then he'd walk away. It was like, fuck, like. And he came out 10 years ago and he taught me a couple of advanced Qigong things and refined some things, but I could take everything he said and it would be, it would be a 10-page book, maybe a 10-page book. So yeah, so I had, because I'm very American, I had to go work with lots of other teachers and say, like, this is the intuition I'm having. Can you help me figure this out? Like, I actually don't know where to take it. And then I think it's because not he was unwilling to teach it so much as he didn't really fully understand what it is he had on a certain level. He wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between his level of mastery and my level of learning. That's my sense. But it made me a very good student of Soma. Like I learned how to watch people's bodies and deduce what they were doing pretty well. And so it's made me a very good teacher. That's been one of the upsides.
I think this highlights one of the things, Miles, in the questions you put together earlier. The question of lineage came up, and I think that's a piece that is you. I hope I'm not projecting too much on this, Keith, but what I see in many training halls, and I am aware of it some in my own history, that within an amber or blue tradition, a conformist tradition, typically there's a very clear roadmap. There's a very clear handing down of these are the things we do. This is how you teach each of the things we do. This is how you unpack each of the things we do. And that can be, for most, that can be brought together and learned. But when there's a break, whether it is an instance of someone who's where there's a language barrier, when there's an instance where someone has a cognitive barrier, for instance, that they're able to do but they're not able to say, then we can end up with a tradition that may still have key aspects and it may still be strong, but it may also lose something that is very hard to bring back.
100%. 100%.
And I think I've always been impressed, Keith, when we've talked about this in the past, with how much work you've done to recreate those things that your teacher would not or could not teach.
But I'm not the same quality master as he was. Like we are not the same. I am at this point, after a lifetime of training, I'm vastly inferior to his level of skill. I was never able to close the gap, and I'm okay with that at this point.
That's something I'm in as well. I'm 17 years younger than my teacher, and he can still put me on my butt anytime he chooses. That's my ego doesn't love that, but it is, so I get that as well. But it's just this question of the value that from the integral perspective, in this question of integral Budo, the value of each of the stages in the history of the lineage is worth considering here. That conformist mode that Aikido is often taught in can have some limits. It can cause some speed bumps. It can keep people constrained. And it also makes sure that we never forget the built-in form of iriminagi, or of whatever other piece there is, so that we can anchor back to that. And that, so there's good news, bad news about these modern traditions, of which mine is one, where some things are explicit, some things are left behind, some things are open to interpretation. Then that frees up the field. That makes room for a lot of innovation and ongoing progress. Nobody wants to try and launch a space satellite with Newtonian mechanics only. We've learned a lot since then.
I see it like a ladder, or you could even say a boat if we use the old Buddhist metaphor. But each rung has its function, And the better that rung, the more functional that rung is, the better chance you'll have of getting to the next rung. Or the better the boat is, the better the vehicle is, the easier you'll cross to the other side. Once you're to the other side, you don't pick up the boat and go walk into the desert with it. You leave it behind. So, if we talk about transmission of lineage, there's the forms that were being transmitted, which are the rungs on the ladder or the boat, and there's there's the internal and the external. And in a way, with the external is hard and complex and incredibly beautiful. They're nothing compared to the internal transmission. And when it comes to the external forms, we can even learn them on YouTube or from a book, more or less. But with the internal stuff, you can't. You need to be with a master who's expressing those forms, that internal states, and they can only take you to the point where you got to walk it yourself. They can't get you across the shore. You have to do it yourself. And a transmission of lineage is kind of a combination of those two things. And then you may be a lineage holder once you've crossed the shore to the other shore. You may end up being a lineage holder for that tradition, or you may just go off on your own, or you may create your own martial art, which is basically the history of martial art. It's the history of Buddhism as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
right. And there's so much of, pedagogy is so much a big part of that. It was like my teacher had terrible pedagogy. He didn't have a good system for teaching. I know an incredible Tai Chi practitioner out here in Colorado. Is one of the best I've ever seen. He's pushing 80. He is just, knowledge of internal power is like very, very, very high. But he's a terrible teacher. His pedagogy is terrible. He starts in the middle, he ends in the middle, he teaches 12 things at once. I know some of his students that have been with him for 17, 18 years, and they're not martial artists because they can't do anything that he can do. I mean, they have beautiful form, and it's going to be good for the longevity in their joints and their mindfulness, and it's a great practice, but they're not warriors in the way that he's a warrior, right? It's like he puts his hand on you, and he's one of those guys that knocks you 10 feet away when he puts his hand on you. And they can't do that because he doesn't know how to teach it. And it's sort of heartbreaking that he doesn't seem to be able to translate what he's doing in a way that even his most senior students are able to get it. And at this point in my life, I think I think those sorts of things begin to fall on the master's shoulders to some degree. It's one thing if you have only 5% of your students get it, that would make sense. But if 0% of your students get it, you might want to take a look in the mirror and see how it is you're teaching, because there's a missing piece that you're responsible for as the teacher. You're the lineage holder, right? It's like my teacher made me the lineage holder. I take that very seriously, right? Like my job is to pass this lineage on, and I don't feel like I'm worthy of what he was doing. As I've said, I'm very humble in how I hold it. But I take teaching people very, very seriously. And if they don't get it to a point, I take on that responsibility, right? Now, obviously there are people that it's like, you're not doing what I told you to do. That's on you. But if they're missing these key pieces, it's like,
You don't authorize them if they're not getting it. You don't
That's right.
rank them if they're not getting it.
That's right.
Ideally, the lineage would give it would be in the methodologies would be embedded in the lineage, but it's not always the case.
Not in the Chinese system.
Yeah, and often empty transmissions is what's happening. There was a famous Japanese Buddhist samurai, Isai Chozanji, from the Middle Ages, medieval Japan, and he went off and trained. He kind of did dojo yaburi. He would go from dojo to dojo and master everything, beat everybody in the dojo, get the best, and he'd go to the next dojo until there were no more dojos. So that to get his esoteric training, he went and trained with the Tengu, these kind of mountain demons, and through that he became an enlightened master and martial arts master, enlightened Buddhist. And he says that the measure of a true master is according to this, that they can take from the dregs of the ancients and extract clear liquid or pure liquid. And that's it. What we get from our teachers is the dregs.
Well
period.
said.
They don't give us the essence. They can't give us the essence. We can be impacted by the essence. Ideally, we'd be impacted by the essence, but they only give us the dregs. And then ideally, now in Buddhism, this is the transmission is much more intact. That's why I say it's
and the pedagogy is much clearer. Usually,
it's much clearer, right? Yeah,
yeah. It's much more linear and much more focused. And at the same time, it's ultimately to your point, Miles. Even in Buddhism, it's ultimately like you can't talk about the ocean with a pond frog. It's like until in Zen, until you've had the experience, until you've had a kensho, right? At least a kensho, an experience of non-dual reality beyond self. Until you've had that, right? We don't really have anything to talk about. It's like someone coming to me to talk about love that's never been in love before. That's not going to be a very productive conversation, And
And go ahead, Keith.
No, go ahead, man.
Okay, well, it ties in some of the oldest writings we have, like the Tao that can be described is not the Tao.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that we talk about that in my lineage is we say that what the teacher does that's meaningful on the internal side, on the real depth of practice side, is not to convey with words, not to tell, but to create the conditions in which it is likely to arise and then point it out when it does. And that's something where, and whatever the it is in that moment, it may be different. The conditions you create might be different in order to get it to arise. But the experience is that when you are teaching, or when you're leading a retreat, or when you're working as a consultant or a coach, frankly, you are both guiding the conversation, guiding the interaction, guiding the practice, and watching very, very carefully to see the progress, the when it arises. And you point it out, and the student probably says something like, "Oh yeah, I got that. I felt that." And then it goes away immediately. And then you point it out again, and it goes away immediately. And then it happens a little more often, and the student actually starts to see it rather than just saying that he or she saw it. And then it eventually gets to the point where you don't have to point it out anymore because the student is seeing it. And then the student is able to intentionally produce it. And then that becomes an embodied piece of the practice for that student. But that journey, or that time on the cushion, or that time in interaction, that's something that is happening. It's not something that the teacher gets to control. It's going to happen when it happens. It always happens by accident. Meditation makes us accident prone.
So listen, guys, we're coming we've already gone over an hour. I hope you're okay with a little bit more, because I thought we did do a kind of a closing round. Okay, so the big question is, so what? So
That's my favorite question. I love that question. I ask that all the time. You're running your lips. So what?
So martial arts is not for everybody, but for those who are interested in it, cool. We've got a whole world that we explore here. But what's the real world applications of everything we've been talking about? Maybe we just do one last round and then.
I'm happy to jump in with that. Yeah. Because it really matters. It matters that you are in your body as much as you can be. Your body is awake. Your body is present. Your body is always right here, right now, and your body never lies. Those are absolutely true. They're never not true. To not have a practice that trains you to be deeply in your body is a waste of your human life. It just is. There is so much that you can learn about triggers, psychology, spiritual states, conflict, fear, wisdom. All these things arise, right? We have our gut heart, we have our heart, and we have our brain heart, center. We have the three brains, right? But most people totally dissociated from their heart brain and from their gut brain. And so nobody has to train to the level that we've trained. It's kind of absurd to train that much. That's for 2% of the population. But anybody can develop a deeper relationship with their body. And you need to develop a relationship with your body. Otherwise, you're missing out on so much of what's actually happening right under your nose. And if you do that, then that empowers the other two things that I think are vital that we're talking about, which is you have to do your fucking shadow work, right? It's like you have to be able to see that you are entirely a conditioned being. And you're conditioned by your culture and by your childhood and by all the ways your parents were good or bad parents and you were picked on. And the climate and whether you had mold in your house and a million other things that determine the way that you actually interpret the world, which is conditioned and largely bullshit. And so you can work on those conditioning things, see them as they are, and you'll never be free from it, but you can be freer from them. And you can understand that in some ways you are imprisoned by them. And there's liberation in that. And then the third path is, of course, the Dharma wheel, which is some version of understanding that the self that you think you are is not real, that it's a construct, and that it arises and falls away, that it didn't exist at some point in time and it won't exist again in time. But there is a knowing, there's a truthfulness, there's a selflessness here that actually is who you are. And it's not theoretical and it's not philosophical. It's right here. It's right here, right now. And when you tie into that suchness, you tie into it through your body and through not getting caught up in your shadow bullshit. And that's the way that I would say that's the so what for me.
Right.
And
Charles?
I would say 100% of the things that Keith just said are true and powerful and an important so what for me. And so as not to just repeat that, though perhaps not as eloquently, I will talk about a different so what, a different place in the application out in the world, which is in the work I do in business, in building cultures, in working on leadership development, on helping people navigate. I am constantly having conversations that are founded on my martial arts and my Zen and my integral studies. And again, whether I use those words or not, whether I bring up the I word or not, having this same sort of conversation, having this same sort of how close are you willing to stand to the fire? How hard are you willing to work? Are you able to do the hard thing and to stay present? When there's a crew dealing with a fire on an oil platform and they lose their shit, people die. If they keep their seats, then better outcomes occur. If there's someone who is looking at the possibility of moving into the C-suite after being a director successfully, or the possibility of just coasting to retirement so that he can get to know his kids and spend more time with his wife, doing either of those fully and powerfully rather than doing whichever one you do because of ego demands or fear of shadow or unwillingness to step in. Hugely different outcomes for the people in your life, for yourself, for the organization. You make a better difference in the world if you're able to engage with the world in ways that are just as powerful as the things we're talking about and Keith just mentioned in terms of deep practice.
Right on. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to go with so what, obviously, but for me, what really, I guess the core, Sam Harris says, he has this beautiful quote. He's talking about the progression of human evolution. That if you look through history, humans have made jumps in one way or the other, and each one of those jumps is marked by a series of successful conversations where they got it together and they were able to together make that leap. And that's for me is the difference between zero sum and positive sum. And the reason, I mean, the so what for me is that if we don't work on making that transition from zero sum to positive sum, we're just repeating history. We're just inflicting more suffering on each other that has been inflicted from time immemorial. And our kind of, especially now, and this for me, this is the imperative of Buddhism. This is the imperative of integral. It's not necessarily the imperative of, certainly blue level martial arts, even orange level martial arts are kind of starting to get that, but it kind of comes in at green, but green has its own thing. A truly integral Buddha would actually have that imperative that we are trying to evolve the system simply because we understand all the problems, whether it's an oil platform or the West Bank or a relationship or how to pay the bills, all the problems, because we can't cope with the way to do conflict well, that it
Love that.
leads to a positive sum.
I love that. Can I share one story just about that?
Yeah, just let me finish. I'll just say that martial arts is a beautiful model for conflict for doing that. But you can do that in anything. But martial arts is just really wonderful for doing that. Okay, Keith, yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. It takes it to the nth degree, right? Yeah. So yeah, the short anecdote was I heard the magician Penn Teller talking about he was just talking on a podcast, and he was talking about the election of Donald Trump, and he kept saying, well, when we voted for Trump and when we elected Trump and we Trump, and the interviewer said, so you voted for Trump? And he was like, oh no, I didn't vote for Trump. And he said, why are you using we? And he said, well, because he's our president and we're all in this together as Americans. So effectively we all voted for Trump. And I was like, that's not a zero sum game. That's taking responsibility for the collective with curiosity and openness. And it really impressed me. It was such a simple thing, but I think it's pointing to what you're saying in a way that was quite powerful.
It reframes the whole discussion. The whole conversation changes at that point.
Right.
It's like we're looking in the same direction, whether we agree.
We're on the same side.
We're on this. There you go. Yeah, we're on the same side. God knows. These days, God knows we need it.
Right. Right. I love that. I love the reframing of the zero sum game, because if our business leaders, if nothing else could change, if that dynamic, if we could grow out of orange and into green a little bit, where we could get past that and see that we are all on the same team, everything would change. All the meta crises would change over.
And the last thing I'll say about the positive sum, what makes it so rare and therefore so difficult is that everything in our survival system is counter. It's just does the opposite of that, and it takes some serious attention and that's where our Dharma training comes in, because we get that capacity to disidentify. If you don't do shadow work, forget it. And developmental stages, then we can, what did you say, Charles? Then we can meet people at whatever cosmic address they happen to be fixated
Where they are.
And this piece is, for me, one of the most important things that Jim Keenan ever said to me. Is one of the principles of his practice is point of maximum opportunity coincides with the point of maximum vulnerability. If we let our egos drive, if we let our biology drive, if we let our team player us them mentalities drive, if we let those things drive, then vulnerability is dangerous as fuck. I'll never get close to that. No way. Hey, he might hit me if I go there, or he might drop me if I go there, but until I can go there, this is the samurai. There's the samurai maxim that the samurai is already dead. What that means in my interpretation, is the samurai who is already dead is willing to go right up to death. The one who is not has to keep this safety cushion, and all the space of that safety cushion, however far I am unwilling to go, I give to my enemy. And if my enemy is staying asleep, if my enemy is chaos in the world, if my enemy is relations between nations that are catastrophic, I'm giving that away if I'm unwilling to step right intimately close to the blade.
You guys know the story of the greatest general of all of China? Have you heard that one? It's out of the Zen tradition. You might know it.
Is it General Quan?
I don't know the name, but he was the best.
Okay.
He went around, beat everybody, and he's conquered the whole country. And then the last, he's doing like a victory parade through the city, and everybody's like bowing down. There's one old man sitting in the corner, not bowing, just smiling, and he felt disrespected. So he goes over and he takes out his sword and he says, how dare you disrespect me? He says, no, you're the greatest. Wait, but I know somebody who's greater. He lives up there on that mountain. Says, oh my God. So he proved himself everywhere. And now there's somebody, okay, so he takes his whole army up to the mountain. It's a big Zen monastery up there. You guys know the story? And he bangs on the door.
No.
Bangs on the door, nothing. And he's got their whole army's right behind him, and this is the last place he's got to prove himself. Bangs on door, nothing. Finally, the door opens, and an old Zen monk walks out. He takes out his sword. He says, "I'm the greatest general in all of China, and I can cut you in two without blinking an eye." Like that. I mean, he's proved it, and this guy, he's going to prove it. Long pause. The Zen monk, master, the abbot of the monastery. He looks him in the eye. He says, "I'm a Zen monk. I can be cut in two without blinking an eye." The general, he knew it. That was it. Here's a guy he can't beat. He bowed down, became his student, and within a day, he was enlightened, of course.
That's great. I love that.
So that's it, Charles. That's exactly the what you're talking about. It's total vulnerability and zero defensiveness, but fucking fierce presence, and that combination cannot be beat.
Yeah, and I will not look away.